So I'm sure many of you have lost count how many billions of dollars worth of weapons the U.S. has sent to Ukraine. And I don't blame you. It's quite hard to keep up. Right now, what's being proposed by the Biden administration are two things, right? So number one is $33 billion. You heard that correctly. 20 billion of that 33 would be for weapons. Okay? The other chunk is going to go to some amusing things I'll show you in a second. And the other idea being proposed, and it's already passed just a few hours ago, this is the Lend Lease. Now, for those of you who know your World War II history, that might sound very familiar, and that's exactly what it alludes to. So basically what happened in World War II in 1941, this is before the U.S. enters the war after Pearl Harbor. You know, the United States at that time didn't want to get involved in the war. What they did is they came up with the Lend Lease, which was an idea that the United States will, as the name implies, lend and or lease tanks, guns, ships, you name it, to the Allies who are fighting the Nazis to help them win the war. And of course, that means that, you know, as the name implies, you're borrowing these things and you're leasing them. So you have to pay for this afterwards, okay? The idea is that it just makes everything much easier, because if you were to sell the weapons, right, this takes time. You have to negotiate things and so on. And given the urgency of the matter of fighting the Nazis, it was too urgent, and the United States decided to go through with that. And many people regard that as one of the reasons that the Allies were so successful. Like, this is one of the areas of contribution that the United States certainly helped the Allies with. It's true, right? It certainly did help and make a difference to defeat fascism in Europe. And so that's what they're alluding to right now. You know, they're trying to compare the war in Ukraine to what's happening in World War II. They tell you this is the biggest war in Europe since World War II. You know, they say it's the biggest refugee crisis since World War II. And, you know, Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, he's literally Adolf Hitler. I mean, again, like, not to minimize what's happening in Ukraine, but, you know, these comparisons are a bit, they're wrong. I'm sorry. They're just flat out ridiculous. If you've noticed, every time the United States has an enemy, whether it's Saddam Hussein or bin Laden, they're always Hitler. Everybody the United States hates is Hitler. In any case, let me walk you through what's going on here, because this is very important to understand. So here is the legislation itself for the Lend Lease. Okay, it's called the Ukraine Democracy Defense Lend Lease Act of 2022. And this is basically, it's a done deal. It's a done deal. So now it's going to President Biden's desk, and he will sign off on it. It's already passed the Senate and the House. It's good to go. And this will basically, let me read you the text here very briefly. This bill temporarily waives certain requirements related to the president's authority to lend or lease defense articles if the defense articles are intended for Ukraine's government or the governments of other Eastern European countries affected by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. For fiscal year 2022 and fiscal year 2023, an agreement to lend or lease defense articles under this bill shall not be subject to certain requirements and provisions that typically apply to such lend-lease agreements, including a requirement that generally prohibits a loan or lease period from exceeding 5 years. The president must establish expedited procedures to ensure the timely delivery of defense articles loaned or leased to Ukraine under this bill. So basically, in other words, this is just getting rid of a lot of bureaucracy and red tape. And if you've been paying attention, there was a CNN headline the other day that the United States doesn't know who it's sending weapons to in Ukraine, right? This is from 19th of April, and the headline from CNN says, "What happens to weapons sent to Ukraine? The United States doesn't really know." So, of course, many of these weapons are falling into the hands of neo-Nazis. Or you could just really say Nazis, because they're a continuation of the Nazism you had in Ukraine, which collaborated with the Nazis in the Holocaust, in World War II. So this is really reckless, because, you know, I know what happened in Syria, I know what happened in Iraq. A lot of this American equipment that was meant for the Iraqis ended up in the hands of ISIS. And then the UK and the US, they claimed they were giving non-lethal aid to these so-called moderate rebels who turn out to be really fanatics. And they lied. They lied about a lot of this stuff. And all the weapons either purposely or accidentally keep winding up in the hands of Al-Qaeda, of ISIS. And of course, they left Taliban, the Americans left Afghanistan last year, and now the Taliban has a lot of the equipment that they left over. Although I think that's a slightly different situation. But nevertheless, I just want to make the point here that this idea of sending unfettered amounts of weapons to a war zone by the Americans has a very, very recent and long history of always ending up in the hands of the people that they're supposed to be fighting, or the people that are, you know, the last ones you want to get their hands on these things. And so the Azov battalion, just as one example, we saw them using even Israeli weapons. How does that add up? You have a Nazi, a neo-Nazi battalion using weapons from the so-called, you know, only Jewish state on earth. It's crazy, but that's what's happening. And we have video evidence, and we've looked through all of this. And now they want to send unlimited amounts of weapons, basically, right? And if you oppose this, what do you call somebody who opposes sending weapons to Ukraine? And I mean, of course, in unrestricted amounts. Well, you call them a Putin puppet, of course. What else? They're Kremlin agents. So just look at this. Just look at this headline over here. Again, this is so absurd. This is from MSNBC, and they say that the GOP, so that's the Republican Party, right? The GOP's Putin wing balks at supplying weapons to Ukraine on loan. So they are talking basically about a couple of Congress members from the Republican Party, because 10 of them voted against it, right? And they are now apparently Putin allies, or as they're saying, the Putin wing. Again, this is really the kind of toxic environment that we're in right now, where anybody who expresses any sort of, you know, opposition is immediately deemed a Kremlin asset or a Putin puppet and so on. You get the idea. Now, here is the vote that took place. You can see this is just a few hours ago, and this is the final tally. So you can see among Democrats, every single Democrat voted in favor of the Lend Lease, 221. And among the Republicans, 196 in favor and 10 against. And so apparently these 10 guys are the Putin wing, according to MSNBC. And that's the final tally. Now, of course, if every single Democrat voted for this thing, what does that mean? What does that mean, guys? Who's in the Democratic Party? Here we go. Ayanna Pressley, Ro Khanna, Pramila Jayapal, AOC, Ilhan Omar, Jamal Bowman, Richie Torres. Do you get the picture? Funny that, right? The squad always seem to be voting on the side of the establishment. Amazing. Amazing. What a coincidence. But they're totally anti-establishment, I promise you. And I really, before I get back to them, I just want to go quickly to this MSNBC thing, just to show you how utterly obscene this is. Look how crazy the Russophobia has become. Look what they describe the Lend Lease as here, okay? They say the year before the U.S. entered World War II, Franklin Roosevelt proposed something called the Lend Lease Act of 1941. The goal was relatively straightforward. In order to assist our British allies, American policymakers created a law that allowed the White House to lease or lend military supplies to any government whose defense the president deems vital to the defense of the United States. Do you see what they said here? Our British allies. So they're making it sound like during World War II, the United States only gave weapons to the British under the Lend Lease Act. Do you know how insane this is? They are leaving out that the Russians also got weapons from the United States through the Lend Lease Act. As a matter of fact, they were the number two recipient after the UK. But because you're not allowed to say anything remotely good about Russia, even that they defeated the fucking Nazis in World War II and were working with the Americans, they've left it out. This is insane. This is insane. This is really something else. Our British allies. No, it wasn't to assist our British allies. It was the British and the Soviets and everybody else fighting the fucking Nazis. What a lie. This is ridiculous. And it's not the only article. I'm not kidding. I've seen this also. Let me pull this up over here. This was, I think, in the Associated Press. I saw the other one where they were saying it's for hold on, please. This is really something. Hold on. Here it is, Associated Press. They talk about Franklin Roosevelt, okay? And at the time, the U.S. president ushered the Lend Lease Act through Congress, responding to British Prime Minister Winston Churchill's appeal for aid. Yeah, what about the Russians? Man, this is so dishonest because they are basically trying to rewrite history implicitly, right? You cannot deny this is what's going on. Because there are many outlets that are writing it this way. They are trying to omit the fact that the Russians received, they were the #2 recipient of weapons under the Lend Lease Act from the United States. And again, the Russians suffered more casualties than anyone in World War II, more than the Americans, more than the British, both soldiers and civilians. They lost 26 million people. And the Russians also did more in terms of numbers, right? The Soviet Union inflicted 80% of all German casualties. 80%. Now, of course, you can say, well, it was American industry and British intelligence and Russian numbers that defeated the Nazis. Yes, it's a combination of all. But like they're acting like the Russians were some kind of like side player that have nothing to do with this. This is really, I was shocked when I read this because in my mind, when I hear Lend Lease, I always remember British and Russians. The British and Soviets got weapons from the US. That's what it is. And they just leave this out everywhere. Unbelievable. Really unbelievable. Now, just going back to who's voted. You know what's coming. You know what's coming. Here's Ilhan Omar voting in favor of the Lend Lease. And again, there are people who are going to defend this because there are always people who are, ready to kiss their butts and defend anything they do. But I'm just a bit confused because last year in July 2021, Ilhan Omar voted to give Israel $3.8 billion in weapons. And this is a woman who claims to support Palestinians. And now she is giving, who knows how many, I mean, this is, again, it's indefinite, right? So now she's voting to give weapons to Ukraine, where we know for a fact that these weapons are falling into the hands of Nazis like the Azov battalion. So please explain to me how Ilhan Omar, who claims to oppose Israel and claims to oppose white supremacy, votes in the span of less than a year, she votes to give Israel billions of dollars worth of weapons and potentially Nazis billions of dollars worth of weapons. Can you please explain that to me, how this is not standard establishment behavior? How can you cannot distinguish her from Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi or any, Democrat, establishment Democrat based on her votes. They're indistinguishable. Do you understand that? If I took away her name and just showed you her voting record, you wouldn't know who that is because she's just like any other Democrat. Right? And of course, there are people going to say, yeah, but sometimes and sometimes. I don't give a fuck. I'm talking about sending weapons. She's sending weapons now to Ukraine, and she sent weapons last year to Israel. And this is very important because this one to Ukraine passed overwhelmingly. So you could say that, she didn't even need to vote yes. She could have voted no, right? Out of principle that she's scared the weapons might fall into the hands of Nazis, which is a very reasonable fear. You know why? Because the United States itself passed legislation explicitly banning the sale of weapons to the Azov battalion. So they know that this is a risk. It's a very real risk to the point that the US government has a ban on sending them weapons. And yet they know that they keep falling into their hands. The other thing, last year, when they were voting to send Israel money, that vote barely passed. It passed by 217. Okay? I posted about it at the time. This is what happened. Again, this is to give Israel $3.8 billion. Okay? It barely passed by 217 votes, and Ilhan Omar votes for it. And Bowman, and Lee, and Ayanna Pressley, and Jayapal. So all of these so-called progressives who like to blab, and they have nothing but but hot air coming out of their mouths. Oh, we support Palestinians, and no. They keep giving weapons to the Israelis who are killing the Palestinians and occupying them. Weird, right? Weird how that works. Interesting. So you support Palestinians just with lip service, but when it comes to oppressing them, you provide the fucking money to do that. What, I mean, who needs enemies with friends like you? Why do the Palestinians need enemies with friends like these? You call giving Israel money supporting Palestinians? What fucking universe do you come from where that makes sense? How does this make sense? It doesn't. It only makes sense when you understand that these people are fucking frauds and they are working with the establishment. Either, it could be they're pressured, who knows? But the result is the same for a Palestinian, for the Syrian Golan Heights. It's the same. It's the exact same for Iran, all of these countries that are attacked by Israel, Lebanon. The result is the same. You are contributing and continuing the same situation. And again, it only passed because she and her friends voted for it. It barely passed, 217 votes. So never forget that. I want to highlight this point because people think that she deserves some sort of credit. Credit for what? Credit for what? Now, the other thing that we have to deal with here is, of course, the $33 billion. That's, again, another thing. You cannot even count how much money they're giving the Ukrainians. But before we move on to that, I just want to play you a tiny clip from CNN. They brought a historian on. Excuse me, he's a professor of history at Columbia University. And same thing. And he came to talk about the Lend Lease. And pay attention to this sentence that he says, okay?
Used Lend Lease. It was part of the casus belli, ultimately, that justified in Hitler's mind the decision to enter into war with the United States. In the broader picture of World War II, that, of course, in some sense was a godsend. But that would definitely not be, I think, our interpretation of the current moment. We are certainly treading a very fine line here. And
let me play that again, okay? Let me play that again.
Spectacular public defeat of Russia or the Soviet Union was really the goal. In Afghanistan, where we bled the Soviets dry, it was done much more discreetly. In this case, it's really a very direct engagement. And what we do know from history is that a regime that is prone to paranoia, prone to conspiracy theories like the Nazi regime was, used Lend Lease. It was part of the casus belli, ultimately, that justified in Hitler's mind the decision to enter into war with the United States. In the broader picture of World.
So do you understand what he's saying? Everybody keeps comparing Putin to Hitler, right? Okay, fine. Let's give you the benefit of the doubt. Let's say you're right. Like he's a carbon copy of Hitler. This historian is telling you that the Lend Lease is what the Germans used to justify entering into war with the United States. Now, obviously, that's not the only reason, but he is telling you himself that, oh, this regime that's prone to paranoia and also saying, like, you're going to piss them off. Do you understand what he's saying? My question here is, when Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, just a few days ago is saying that the danger of nuclear war is very real. Do you really think this is the right time to be doing things like this? Again, like, how far are you going to test the waters before it starts blowing up in our faces? At what point do you think the Russians are going to look at this and say, you know what? This is unacceptable. They've crossed the red line. And then it becomes a nuclear war. It's so easy. It's really much, much easier than people think to get to that point. And everybody seems to think that this is okay. This is fine. I've seen the most absurd headlines. Like, I'm not kidding. Things that you would not believe. Like, yeah, the United States should try winning a nuclear war. Like, as if it's like a football match or some kind of extreme sport that you should try. They are disconnected from reality. They are really disconnected from reality. And this historian himself is telling you that, fine, you want to say Putin's like Hitler. Well, you risk angering him. And in this day and age, so in 2022, that could mean nuclear war. Back then is different. Now, going to the $33 billion, here is Joe Biden. Well, I'll play you Zelensky first. Take a look at the Ukrainian President Zelensky, what he has to say.
Українці, українки, усі наші захисники і захисниці. Сьогодні маємо серйозні новини для нашої держави, для нашого захисту. По-перше, Сполучені Штати Америки підготували новий пакет підтримки для України на $33 мільярди. Зокрема, більше 20 можуть піти на оборону, ще більше 8 мільярдів доларів заплановані на економічну підтримку, ще 3 мільярди доларів будуть направлені на гуманітарну допомогу. Це дуже важливий крок Сполучених Штатів. І я вдячний за нього американському народу і особисто президенту Байдену. Сподіваюсь, Конгрес швидко підтримує цей запит на допомогу нашій державі. Президент Байден цілком справедливо сказав сьогодні, що цей крок не дешевий, але негативні наслідки для усього світу від російської агресії проти України та проти демократії настільки масштабні, що у порівнянні з ними ця підтримка Сполучених Штатів є необхідною. Разом ми точно можемо зупинити російську агресію і надійно захистити свободу в Європі.
Right, so you get the idea. He's very happy about this. There's no question. And I want to show you very briefly the sheet from the White House, the fact sheet, and what they say they're going to supply them with. And of course, like we said, 33 billion, 20 billion is for military assistance, so for weapons, essentially. And here's some of the other resources they're going to give this. Are you ready? So down here, that they are going to counter Russian disinformation and propaganda narratives, promote accountability for Russian human rights violation, and support activists, journalists, and independent media to defend freedom of expression. That's lovely. I love that, right? You know, the United States is really a bastion of independent media, right? CNN, Fox News. What could we do without them? We'd be we'd be in dire straits without them, right? Independent media, just to translate what this says, is basically anybody who is pushing a pro-NATO narrative. And nothing's, you know, there's nothing more independent than being funded by the US government, right? That's really great. That's really great. So in any case, this is from Kim.com. Look what he says. He says, Joe Biden wants another 33 billion on top of the billions already spent on the US proxy war in Ukraine. No end in sight. He says it's not to attack Russia, but to defend Ukraine. Well, how can you do one without the other? Exactly. And this well, it's not a meme. It's a very important historical photograph from an anti-war protest. But it echoes the sentiment quite succinctly. And you know what's funny to me is that regarding this issue, it's kind of like what I was just talking about with the Department of Homeland Security. When you have like a disagreement between Democrats and Republicans, it's not really about the substance. It's more sort of a facade. It's a show, and they kind of disagree on the wrong things and agree on the wrong things. Look at Donald Trump Jr., what he's saying. He's saying Biden is asking for $33 billion to send to Ukraine on top of the billions already sent to the very corrupt nation. Well, I would say it's a corrupt government, not nation. But in any case, he says, but they couldn't spend a tiny fraction of that, here we go, to finish the wall, secure our border, and end the humanitarian crisis and drug sex trafficking at our border. It sounded so right, and then he just can't get over the finish line, right? It starts out good, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. So they disagree on sending the money to Ukraine, but they both agree, Democrats and Republicans, on not spending it on healthcare, on not spending it on university, on not spending it on things that would benefit Americans, whether it's, you know, rebuilding infrastructure, universal pre-K, name whatever you want. And this is kind of emblematic of what I'm talking about when we say, you know, Democrats, Republicans are really the same. They are really the same, or at least the result is very much the same. And, you know, again, this is a coincidence because I was looking up things about Ukraine, and then I stumbled on this random video that somebody posted, and honestly, this is shocking. This is really shocking. Look at this video. So this is the United States. I mean, this looks like, you know, in a post-apocalypse world. That's what it looks like. It's apocalyptic in a way. And you see how poor all of these people are. They're living in the trash. I mean, my point here is that the U.S. government wants to send so much money. It's not just like once or twice or no. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. 800 million here, another 800 million. You know, let's go 3 billion, 33 billion, and they got nothing to spend on helping their own citizens. And this again, it tells you how the U.S. government. When I say U.S. government, I'm really saying Wall Street, the weapons manufacturers, the people who run the government. It's one and the same. You see, once again, how they not only create poverty and destruction and misery in other countries with the sanctions and the war, they even do it at home. Because at the end of the day, when they're lining their friends' pockets at Raytheon or Wall Street with these billions of dollars, they're screwing their own citizens, right? It comes at the expense of their own citizens. And, you know, when they say, oh, we're going to send weapons to Ukraine, what they're really doing is they're sending boatloads of cash to their friends and then weapons to Ukraine. Do you understand? That's how it works. They're making money from this. There's no question about it. Anybody who tells you otherwise is a liar. Is an absolute liar. There is nothing like a good war for the weapons, for the arms peddlers, right? And you'll always have bipartisan support on that. I mean, the fact that 10 Republicans voted against it, again, this is trivial. It's trivial. It's a joke. It doesn't mean anything. The fact that the overwhelming majority voted for it, that's more important. And again, this is the difference between how we in independent media cover things and how mainstream media cover things. Because for them, when 10 Republicans vote not to send weapons to Ukraine and to, you know, line the pockets of the arms dealers, their takeaway at MSNBC is that these 10 Republicans are the Putin wing. While our takeaway is that the overwhelming majority of both Democrats and Republicans want to prolong the war in Ukraine, and they are sacrificing the lives of Ukrainians, using Ukraine as a pawn to prod the Russian bear and make as much money as possible. Because when you are interested in a diplomatic settlement, you could have avoided this war a long time ago, right? Many of the things that Russia's complaining about, they've been complaining about them before anyone even heard about Vladimir Putin. No one knew who the fuck Vladimir Putin was when Russia was saying, you need to back off with these bases and get away. You don't expand with NATO past Germany. Okay? And then, of course, when you want a diplomatic settlement, you make meaningful concessions, you talk, you engage in dialogue. You don't send billions and billions and billions of dollars to fuel the war, adding fuel to the fire. But that's exactly what they're doing. And that's what the mainstream media will never fucking tell you, because they work for the arms dealers. They're the fucking mouthpiece of the Pentagon. Do you understand? And that's why they give you this garbage, this trash, which I wouldn't wipe my ass with. Putin's wing. Grow up, you fucking children. So this is what's happening. And I want to show you a clip from Biden that someone posted on Twitter. Look what he says here. Okay, when he's talking about these 33 billion.
It's going to allow pensions and social support to be paid to the Ukrainian people so they have something in their pocket. It's going to allow pensions and social support to be paid to the Ukrainian people.
Wonderful. Where's the social support for your own citizens? They're really devious in a way. Yeah, they're really devious. How they're so ready to open their wallets, so to speak, and sympathize with others. They don't really sympathize with them. Again, if they actually cared about Ukrainians, they wouldn't be using them to annoy the Russians and start wars, right? But basically, just in lip service, where's this compassion for your own citizens? Where is it? Nowhere to be found. Nowhere to be found. And it's really it's disgusting. I also wanted to show you another piece of information, because this is quite interesting. Let's take a look over here at this Lend Lease bill. Okay? Because from what I'm seeing, if you go on the Senate's website, again, this is the Ukraine Democracy Defense Lend Lease Act. Okay, that's the official name. And today, it passed. But let's look at the actions, what happened. The date that it was introduced in the Senate is the 19th of January. What? Hold on a second. How does that make sense? The war in Ukraine started February 24th, right? And yet, over a month before that, they're getting ready for this Lend Lease. It's a bit odd, right? And then, of course, you'll have people say, yeah, but that's because the Russians were amassing troops at the border and so on. Hold on a second, man. This is very extreme. Again, the only time this has been used before is to fight the Nazis in World War II. Do you understand? So you're telling me that the Americans, instead of making sure that there's a diplomatic solution before the war, right? Like, you're telling me that they're so sure, the Americans were so sure that Russia's going to invade that the only thing they could do is send weapons. No, that's not true. Why not a diplomatic solution? Like, if you're ready to do a Lend Lease Act that hasn't been seen since World War II, a month before the war, why not put that same kind of effort into diplomacy? Huh? Where is it? There was nothing of this caliber. I mean, just look at the amount of money and the amount of PR and just the whole mobilization from the EU, the US. Did you see anything of that scale diplomatically to avoid the war right now, to stop the war? Be honest with yourself. Do you see anything of that size? It doesn't exist because they're not interested in it. They're not interested in it. And like, go ahead. You want to blame the Russians? Go ahead and blame the Russians. Fine. But that doesn't change what I'm saying. Even if the Russians are 100% guilty of every single thing they're saying, where is the diplomatic effort to stop this in advance, to stop this now? It doesn't exist. They're only interested in making money and continuing the war and prolonging it as much as possible. And that is the truth. And they're no different from each other. And that's why both Democrats and Republicans pushed for this, because their friends, the people they work for, are going to make money. They don't work for the American people. They don't work for towards peace. They work for corporations and banks, and that is the real takeaway.